don't have a person to say the prayer. Come up here, John Rose. You say the prayer.
Please bow your heads in prayer. Lord, we praise you this day that you've made, the food that we are about to eat. We give you thanks for that. We give you thanks for this nation, and we give you thanks for those who've heard the call, those who serve in the military, those who support the military, and those in our everyday lives who support you. For you are the sovereign God, and all is in your control. We thank you for the veterans, for the active duty. We thank you for this museum. We thank you for the Bronstein Foundation, who helped support this program. And we give you thanks that Colonel Gross could be with us today and share a message that is an important message for all of us to hear. We ask this and the blessings upon us and in the days of our lives, and we may be your servants. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Yes, thanks. 1, 2, 3. He's related to our main speaker. He's a brother. I think he advised his brother how to do things. I don't know if his brother listened or not. Mr. and Mrs. Yoakum, will you please front and center? They're busy eating. Stand up. Okay. If you receive your waters and you see some of your food, these are the two that have been responsible for the last 3 years. They've not missed one. Lunch and learn. They're going to become volunteers. They're leaving us. They're going to stay near their daughter down in Tennessee. But Louisiana, they're going to be gators. Sorry, I got the wrong state. They're going to Louisiana, sorry. So they're going to learn how to make crawfish and talk Southern. And eat those oysters. Well, thank you for all your service. This is a card and appreciation from the museum. We need more people like you. And if you want to sell your red shirts to somebody up here, they'll be glad to find them. Oh, you're going to wear the museum there. Good advertising. There's no sales here then. Before I get to announcing the main speaker, in August, we've got a speaker coming. He's a World War II veteran, and he wrote this book. His name is Donald Ray Cobb. If you want to buy the book, it's over at the gift shop there. But it's about bombing on D-Day. It was in Normandy. He was D0 hitting the shells over Normandy. He talks all about that in the book, and he's going to give us a talk August 3rd. So
17.
That will be when he's here. So we'd love to have you here. Prior to that, we're going to have a thing called the Wolfgang Orchestra playing before he talks. So love to have you all there. So sign up with Mrs. Browning. She's here somewhere in a dark blue shirt. And then you get a RSVP and you get front row if you want. The second thing is I have Don Dow. Would you come up here, Don, for just a second? What I'm going to talk about before he gets to the microphone is we're going to hand helmets out like we usually do. These helmets are for our patronicity grant. Right now we've been 35 days in the patronicity grant, and that's to make an elevator that goes up to the second floor. So all of us will eventually need an elevator. Not right now, but we will. So it's an investment for your future. But right now we have when I talked 2 weeks ago, we had $21,000. Right now we have $36,332 in the fund. We want to get $50,000. So any dollar change you're putting in there, we're going to give you recognition on the plaque that says Lunch and Learn Group. And if you want an individual, you can send a check in there and we'll give you individual credit there. Now, this Dan Dow is going to talk for 2 minutes, and if you don't use it for what this purpose is, you can use it for other purposes. He's going to talk about how you move your IRA money to a nonprofit without having to pay taxes. And he's going to give you 1 minute.
So, you already know that you can make contributions and take it off your taxes. However, as I look at the crowd, I figure most of you now are not itemizing. You just take standard deduction, so it does you no good. However, if you're over 70, which most of you are, you have to take money out of your IRA. If you do what's called a qualified charitable distribution, you pay no taxes. Everybody says, well, how do I do that? Well, what you do is you get a hold of whoever's holding your money for you, whether it's Fidelity or the bank, whoever, and you tell them you want to make a qualified charitable distribution. They send the check directly. So the only information you have to have is how much you're going to send and the address you're going to send it to, which you can get for free. When you do your taxes, make sure whoever does them knows you did a qualified charitable distribution. If you do them yourself, as you're doing your taxes, it says line 4, IRA distribution, and you put the amount in. Then there's another little box, and you put in QCD, and you deduct the amount you gave from the amount you took out of your IRA, and you just take it for the tax on the difference. So if you put $5,000 in, you're paying 10% tax already, you just save $500. You can use it for church, for tithes, you can use it for anything. So talk to your financial planner, whoever it is, or whoever's holding your IRA, you can fix this a phone call and find out how to do it. It's called a qualified charitable distribution. Save some taxes, why not?
Thank you, Mr. Dow. Okay, and before you leave, you're more than welcome to visit our gift shop or become what you call a member here. My team is in charge of that, and the team would love to have you sign up. Okay, well, our next speaker here, and we're lucky to have him. He's a brother to the slide projector man here, John Gross. What we forget? Oh, stand up. Where's this guy? Okay, this guy is from Evansville Public Library, okay, Eric Estep, E-S-T-E-P, okay, now he is a war fanatic, he likes war, in regards to research, he's from the library, and the library is a tremendous source of research, and he's going to come up here on his computer when Mr. Dr. Gross is done today, and he will you can ask him to search anything. Evansville Library has the archives, the Evansville Press from about 1870 all the way to 1999. So you can search your relatives, you can search about anything. And he's going to hopefully provide this service every other Thursday when you're here. And when you come up, just ask him questions. These databases are amazing, but the search is not easy, and he can teach you how to search it. So he's a war historian, so we're lucky to have him. So just ask him one question, you ask him something else. My grandmother did bunco in 1936, and it's in the paper. So, they got a lot of things in there. But anyway, anything else I forget, Mike? Nothing else? Okay. Now, we're going to introduce our main speaker. We're very lucky. This gentleman came all the way from New Jersey a couple of days ago, and he's been on the docket for a period of time. He is a general surgeon, but he told me the other night, 0.3% of the forces are right at the front line. He's what you call the front line, okay? You're going to see some things, you're going to talk about some things about front line stuff. We're in the back line now, and because of terrorism, everybody started in the front line, but he's really on the front line. So he's done surgery in Afghanistan and Iraq and all these recent wars that a lot of this is out of sight, out of mind. So I think we're very lucky to have him. He's active duty. I've never looked that good in my life in my uniform ever. But, he looks like he came out of the catalog. But anyway, his name, he's a full-bird colonel, and he's still active duty. His name's Kirby Gross, and he was trained here in Evansville, and we're lucky to have him talk today. Kirby?
Thank you, Dr. Browning, for the kind introduction. And yes, I'm from Evansville. It's nice to be back. And I would very much like to congratulate the Wartime Museum leadership on the museum. This really embodies the effort of what's happened in the Tri-State region and also America generally. Because the real nature of war is exerting one's will. We think about the troops, one set of troops, infantry, exerting their will on another, air power, exerting will between the warriors. But the real focus of war is not necessarily upon the combatant. It really has to do with the nation's will. And what you see here, this effort truly reflects the tri-state region, Evansville region effort and their will during World War II. So really, congratulations. And that effort continues. So we have MREs. MREs are manufactured in 2 locations in the United States. One is Mullen, South Carolina. The other is Evansville, Indiana. I'm one of the few folks who can be deployed and have an MRE and have a home-cooked meal. So I have perhaps more of a fond memory of MREs than many of my colleagues. But today I'll be talking about not from the distance, but improving combat casualty care, and that begins from the point of injury. And I'll be presenting information which is based upon actually seeing the misery and the mortality and the morbidity of the conflict. I'll be presenting some data today. I'll be presenting cumulative numbers. But please don't, as I present these numbers, I want to make sure you understand that myself and other individuals who provide care to our warriors understand every single casualty, every single wounded is important. And don't want that to be lost as I present groups of numbers today. These are my own opinions and not that of the U.S. Army or the U.S. government. And in some ways, I think it's almost destined to come going to the Army. A bit about myself, I went to Rice, then I went off to Rose-Hulman to study engineering initially. And Rose-Hulman had the last undergraduate school in America that had obligatory required ROTC. And I began undergraduate studies in 1972. And the reason Rose-Hulman had mandatory ROTC was because Rose, as you know, is a very technically oriented school. They have engineering and the basic sciences, and that was about it. To be an accredited university or college, you have to have a more broad education. Well, the leadership at Rose recognized they had a lot of ROTC scholars. And to meet those requirements to be an accredited university, they used ROTC professors who read military history. And in all honesty, the junior officers who were the military history instructors at Rose-Hulman were outstanding. These were young men who had great experiences and very mature. And actually, they were great recruiters, if you would, for folks to become ROTC cadets, or actually influence others later on in their life. I then finished my undergraduate requirements at Indiana State, and went to medical school at Indiana University. I did my general surgery training at IU in Indianapolis. And I think some of you here may have known a few of these names. Dr. John Jessup, who was the chairman of the Department of Surgery at Indiana University, and Dr. James Madura. And Dr. Jessup had a big influence on me. And we had a very military structured surgery program at IU. In fact, I later found that our training program in surgery at Indiana University had more military structure than the Army itself. And in part, that was because John Jessup, as a young Marine, was identified as being very bright. Jessup, you're going to learn Japanese. Was a 19-year-old Marine, John Jessup was on the track in Missouri when the Japanese signed the surrender. James Madura, another general surgery faculty. Dr. Madura had finished his internship at Ohio State University. Then he went to Vietnam. And he reported his experience being a surgeon in Vietnam as a young surgeon as being formative on his skills. He reported after spending a year in Vietnam, he came back to Ohio State, was actually a better surgeon than his faculty members. And the stories that Dr. Madura would describe about the injuries, those things really stimulated young surgeons as well. So, in a way, along with family, having participated in World War II, father and uncles, was almost decimated. And in fact, Hippocrates, who's better known for the oath, actually Hippocrates years ago said, to become a surgeon, follow the army. And I would suggest that in my comments, you'll see I may quibble a bit with Hippocrates now, but certainly there is a lot of truth to that. Well, this is our report card. That is the report card of the deployed healthcare system. And this report card demonstrates that the case fatality rate at the start of conflict in Afghanistan dropped from 18% to less than 10%. So the case fatality rate from 18% to less than 9%. And this is just a snapshot of the early years. Now, case fatality rate is a metric which merely describes the number of dead divided by all those who are wounded. Okay. Now, certainly statisticians may argue this is truly an accurate number, but you'll notice the upper line goes up. And that merely reflects what surgeons use, the number of surgeons use to characterize how severely injured people are. So you'll notice the injury severity score during the same time that the case fatality rate went down, the severity of those injured went up. So that helps reinforce that this improvement in the case fatality rate was truly a significant number. Okay. And this is a number which is informed to our military leadership, so our national leadership, highest levels are aware of this. And I'm so glad to report this to you. Okay, and these are numbers which typically don't get distributed widely to the community at large. Now, you notice that this is taken from the Journal of Trauma, part of our civilian journals, which are important to share information. And so, as a lot of this information we present today, you're going to see is taken from our civilian medical journals. But well before this information was distributed to the leadership, people who assess read the journals, our clinical civilian peers, our leadership were full well aware of this. But that is part of the way we've improved outcomes, is by this collaboration with our civilian colleagues. It's imperative that we have transparency in terms of our statistical analysis and the sort of information in our outcomes, because that's a huge way in which we've been able to improve the outcomes during these past years of war. So I mentioned the case fatality rate dropped from about 18% to 9%. That was in those years for 2005 and 2013 and 2014. Well, how does that compare to our historical years? Well, if you look, World War II, and we didn't have good statistical analysis back in World War II and Vietnam era, but generally the case fatality rate during the World War II era was about 20%. And the case fatality rate in the Vietnam era was about 17%. So over those 30 years between World War II and Vietnam, not much advance in outcomes. And then you think the end of Vietnam to 2001, 2002, the case fatality rate, there's been no improvement. And I know there have been improvements in trauma care over that era. But that's why it makes it this improvement in outcomes from 18% at the start of Operation Enduring Freedom, Afghanistan, to less than 9%, that much more impressive. A drop of 9% in such a short period of time. And this is what I'll try to impart to you today, the real mechanisms in which some of those improvements occur. And some of those improvements you're actually the beneficiaries of, okay, in terms of care that those who are injured receive here on the civilian side. Now keep in mind, that improvement in clinical outcomes has occurred during war. Not merely a group of clinicians in our white coats and walking through the halls of hospitals. Occurred in an area of conflict. When the Department of Defense arrives to an area, the nations and the individuals of those nations experience one of two emotions: fear or hope. Now, also while we're deployed, in addition to being providing care, being educators to our junior providers who we're deployed with, in addition to being investigators to try to find out how we can improve care and maintain our officership and tactical skills, we recognize that oftentimes the deployed health system is the only time those citizens of other nations may have a chance to appreciate, does the United States stand for those things it espouses to? Does the United States truly stand for charity? Does it truly stand for justice? And that is the background in which some of these improvements occur. So I've described my perspective on how we've improved outcomes. And you'll notice I don't specifically mention new products here, but those products are been validated by what I described here. And the first thing I'd like to describe is a way in which the improvement in combat casualty care occurred was by processes. Okay. Next. And specific process is that of a trauma system. That is establishing a well-organized system of trauma care in a theater of operations. We did not have a formal trauma system at the outbreak, at the start of Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan and North Iraq. That was established in 2004. Now, the notion of a trauma system, well, let me first explain. A trauma system. What's a trauma system? I guess you could summarize it very easily by saying the right patient is the right place at the right time for the right care. I think we all recognize that if you're minimally injured, it may be reasonable to go to a local emergency department. However, if you're severely injured, if you're in coma, that's where going to a trauma center, as Evansville has, is the prudent course of action. And that's why your pre-hospital providers will take individuals to those designated trauma centers. So that's was initiating a formalized trauma system before. And we all work with systems all the time. Anyway, think of the transportation system. In the airport here, that's the big highway, right? You have to have some system in which things are connected. And those systems, oftentimes the challenge is going across various jurisdictions and areas of leadership. Now, the idea of a trauma system is not new with the military, as mentioned. It was actually originated with the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma, basically the authority for civilian trauma care. And this notion was actually envisioned in the 1970s. And a huge part, and absolutely fundamental, to have a trauma system is that of having data. You must have information. And certainly we all know when we receive care, whether we receive care here in the United States at home or whether it's deployed, we know that the record of care is made. Sometimes it may be abbreviated in a theater of operations in a particularly hectic case. But that information, that data is then entered into a registry. And a registry is a queryable database from which we can learn lessons. And it's actually imperative for metrics. The whole goal is for us to continue to improve care. And for improvement, and it's very standardly accepted in the realm of process improvement, to improve something, you must be able to measure it. In this case, sadly, the metric which is most easily ascertained is arrival death. In addition, performance improvement requires not only having a metric, but also it's important to compare. Just as we've done, we reviewed our improvement in case fatality rate from 2004, 2005 to 2013. We measured and compared. We measured over time. Okay? Or we measured to different conflicts. We measured our experience in Afghanistan to that of World War II or Vietnam. So to get better results, you measure and compare. And to get best results, you measure, you compare, and you reward. And fortunately for us in the DoD, merely having the recognition that we're improving outcomes, knowing the case fatality rate is improving, is a reward on itself. So that's the way we envision the improvement in combat casualty care outcome. And this in very easy with standard processes which are well known and not particularly novel. In fact, a Navy reservist at Oregon Health Sciences University in 1999 identified in the civilian realm that a mature trauma system decreases mortality and morbidity by 15 to 20%. So this body of information was known to our civilians, and this is exactly why the DoD, Military Health System Leadership, copied, plagiarized, stole, with their permission and their encouragement, incorporating those processes to the deployed trauma system, which was established in 2004. So we talked about the process, and specifically having a trauma system in place, and also having a registry. We'll also talk about standardization, clinical standardization, and investigations. One of the challenges we have in the Department of Defense in the deployed environment is, and particularly thinking about recently, we had one hospital on 3 continents. We had casualties wounded in Asia. They were then moved to Europe, Germany, launched, and their definitive care back in the United States. One hospital, 3 continents. Also, we had a heterogeneous group of caregivers in theater of operations. I've had a good opportunity to train complements of the United States Army in trauma at Vanderbilt. We know that the clinical caregivers we have in theater are not always focused solely on trauma. And in the area of specialization, we have individuals who are not practicing trauma routinely. Okay? So it's important that we have some standardization of the care that's to be delivered. So clinical practice guidelines, so we can direct our providers who, and let's face it, oftentimes military providers tend to be younger and not that experienced. So standardization, having clinical practice guidelines, so individuals have a well-referenced direction on how to manage. And that's important. So we understand this is how we manage things in a very far forward environment, so we can anticipate in Germany what would have been done before if the medical record may have been incomplete. And then clinical investigations. Okay? It's important that the providers have a mission to understand how can we improve things. But it's not just a mission and a goal to imagine how can we improve things, but you need to have some degree of expertise to know how to ask those questions. Okay? So a lot of the ways we've improved care has not actually been research. That is, and we know that doing research in the theater of operations, we typically review merely how things are going. We assess the need to adjust fire rather than any formal clinical research and those requirements. However, you'll see we've had some significant improvement. Next. In the registries, as I mentioned, American College of Surgery on Trauma first envisioned their registry in 1983. Now, their registry has over 5 million patients. And this is how we've learned a lot about civilian trauma. In the Department of Defense, our registry was established in 2004. Now we have more than 75,000 casualties who are entered. And each of those records are abstracted into the registry. And once again, using a queryable database, we can typically find out what's working and what's not fairly quickly. And this is exactly how we do that. That's the operational cycle. And if you look at the top, we provide care, trauma care delivery. And that care is provided per the direction of our clinical practice guidelines. Okay? That care is delivered, the record is then reviewed and entered into the registry. Data analysis is conducted, and then we assess the outcomes. Then we use that to update our guidelines. And then the whole cycle continues. And many of you have seen this in your own industries. And this is just the standard performance improvement cycle. This is not complex. It's merely a matter of having the will to continue on and execute this. All right? Now, in fact, you can imagine this cycle, the faster the cycle is spinning, the faster we can learn, the faster we can improve outcomes. And in fact, some of our guidelines we actually update within every 3 or 4 months based upon information that was coming out of our registry. Were our guidelines achieving the results we desired? And if not, they needed to be adjusted. So you can imagine the cycle spinning and spinning. The faster that spun, the more improvement we can make. And it's well known that improvements in trauma occur in conflict. Why? Because there are many casualties in a very short period of time. So we had that opportunity to learn. So we truly had a deployed trauma system that was learning on itself. And in a way, a group of individuals who working in improving combat casualty care most liken themselves to Bletchley Park. Remember the Enigma machine? That was the Germany's way to send encrypted messages. Bletchley Park was the area where the cryptologists in England were hunkered down trying to crack the code for the Enigma machine. In fact, a group used the registry as a way to crack the code to improve combat casualty care. That is, it was continually being updated. What can we tweak out of this? What can we learn? What can we be doing better? And that was a huge part of the improvements. One example of that is the use of tourniquets. It's been debated for years if tourniquets were beneficial. Or did tourniquets actually cause more damage than not? In Vietnam, 2,500 service members died solely with an extremity injury. Those 2,500 service members may have lost a limb, but they shouldn't have died. This is some of the early studies looking at tourniquet use in the theater of operations. And if we look at this analysis demonstrates that the survivorship higher is good, 100% survivorship is good. If we look, the improvement in survivorship is much greater if tourniquets are applied in the pre-hospital realm. And this is uh, the article as it came out in the civilian lay literature. Once again, this information which was identified is then known in the DoD. We've informed our leadership. Once it's been demonstrated that these tourniquets were effective, then all systems go. Then it was necessary for the entire military domain, and the military currently, they've been similar to your experiences in various domains: doctrine, organization, training, materiel, leadership, personnel, and facilities. So once we've identified something that would be successful, then doctrine. This became part of our doctrine. T, training. The medics were trained on use of tourniquets. Materiel. This way, tourniquets were put in the kits so they would be delivered to theater of operations. Okay. Just a bit of a follow-up on use of tourniquets. We know there's all too much violence in America. And in fact, out of the experience in the DoD, there's some initiative called Stop the Bleed. And there's an effort for to provide tourniquets and train the lay public on use of tourniquets. And many of you may have noticed when you go to public locations, such as airports or shopping malls, that there are actually Stop the Bleed kits, which are co-located with your AEDs. And the importance being that if there would be that horrific event, Sandy Hook, Las Vegas, other events, that the ways to effect hemorrhage control would be made available, but also it's important that the lay public be trained on how to control hemorrhage. Now, our resuscitation protocols. How have we resuscitation? That is, what type of food do we give those individuals who've been injured? 2001, 2002, at the start of the war, is giving salt water, giving crystal water. Okay. Was that the right answer? Well, we found out there's a better way. And so the resuscitation protocols were changed to include giving blood, packed red blood cells, which are part of the blood, as well as giving the plasma, which has the coagulation factors, and platelets as well. So it was identified in using a blood, adding the fresh frozen plasma and platelets necessary, we actually had improvements. Well, in fact, this is nothing new. Some Vietnam era folks here probably recall those combat casualties you cared for, they received blood. They received whole blood at the time of injury. For trauma protocols, got away from using whole blood, and reasons being, various reasons, because blood could be used by putting it into its components, platelets, white cells, plasma. It could be used more broadly for those non-trauma patients who need it. So the use of blood was abandoned. However, we noticed by combining those back together, there were improvements. And even next, we've identified that using whole blood in the pre-hospital realm has been made. So what has been happening is identification of, let's get rid of saline, let's start giving not just packed red blood cells, but giving blood, that's what your casualties losing, and giving that blood early on our transportation platforms. And giving whole blood. Now, part of our experience in the DoD, at Cooper University Hospital in Camden, New Jersey, we have whole blood in the refrigerator in the trauma bay. Okay. That will improve our outcomes for here in the States. Other things we've learned, and oftentimes there are so many good ways to answer questions without formal research. And this was a study which identified, can we do better training for our flight medics? And the flight medics at the start of the conflict were trained at the EMT basic level, emergency medical technician basic level. Well, was that good enough? Well, interestingly, at one point, there was a reserve medevac unit in Afghanistan, and every member of that reserve medevac unit had been trained up to the EMT paramedic level, a higher level of care. So it was a very easy way to determine. Let's compare those patients who were flown by those units who had their flight medics trained up to paramedic level versus those patients who were flown by EMTs at the basic level. Guess what? There are improved outcomes in those patients who are flown by the paramedics. Out of this natural study, if you would, in assessing the outcomes, our whole training protocol for our paramedics, for our medics changed. Now, in the Army, every flight medic is trained up to the paramedic level. So that's an example of natural opportunities to answer questions and improve outcomes. So many of these things I'm talking about, it's just when we build a wall of knowledge, it's not as if we take a great big brick or a boulder. Oftentimes we take little bits of information to eventually add to that wall of knowledge, which improves care. That's why we have several reasons why outcomes have improved. This is another study which looked at the same question. To what level, degree of training should our medics be? This happened down in southern Afghanistan where we had our UK colleagues who trained all of their medics to the EMT paramedic level. And once again, same answer. That is, training our medics to a higher level for en route care and improved outcomes. Okay. So the data we've been discussing has been rather data from our registry. And our registry are those patients who arrive at our deployed trauma sites, receive care. But our information is a bit incomplete. And this is a question, historical question, that some of you may actually be familiar with an interest in aviation. And during the Battle of Britain and the efforts of the Allies to destroy the German infrastructure, aircraft would fly over Germany, bombing range. And this example of the B-17 that, in spite of that big gash across its tail, made it back to England. And of course, those aircraft were accompanied by fighters. And the debate was, how do we make those aircraft more airworthy? Where do we reinforce them? And there's a debate. The aircraft that came back, this is where the holes were on the hulls of the wings. Yeah, maybe that's where they're being shot. That's where we need to put greater reinforcement. That way there'll be less chance of getting shot down. Well, no. The data that was needed, the information to be known was those aircraft who went down over Europe. If you wanted to find out how to improve the airworthiness of those aircraft that were shot down over Europe, you shouldn't look at the aircraft that were making it back to England. It should be those that went down. So when we look at data, when we look at information, we need to make sure we have the entire picture. And so that historical vignette really plays into another way which we use to improve outcomes. And that is assessing the wounds of our fallen. We know all U.S. service members who are killed in action or died of wounds returning back to base and go to Dover Air Force Base. our armed forces medical examiners do a very respectful assessment and identify those injured and those injuries, and were there things that could have been done better? Okay. This is the last noble sacrifice our fallen provide, an opportunity to improve future outcomes. So we talked about several topics which fit together that help us improve outcomes. But some other points that are very important are that of our leadership and having the right leaders. And we were fortunate to have the leaders that empowered the clinicians to give us the green light to go ahead and do these things. And let's just face it, docs who go around asking, why do you want to do that? Sometimes we're not all that well received by some of the military leadership, just by virtue of our general question answering. Our leadership is tremendously supportive. They give us a green light, because they were also very invested in improving outcomes. This is an example of Secretary of Defense Robert Gates taking a bold leadership decision. Question came up at one point as we were beginning to rearrange air assets, our medevac units in theater. Should we move out some of our medevac assets because we only have a few casualties? Secretary of Defense Gates said no. He mandated all casualties be delivered to a surgically capable site within 1 hour. The golden hour mandate. This is generally the same slide I showed earlier. We notice the decreasing case fatality rate. If you superimpose that vertical red line, 2009, that's when Secretary Gates mandated the golden hour rule. The case fatality rate, the dotted line, went down. Bold leadership, which improved outcomes. It's not just the clinical realm. Many other factors go into improving outcomes. Also, it has to do with collaboration in the civilian part. This slide demonstrates Dr. David Boyd, Executive Director of the American College of Surgeons, and Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs, Jonathan Woodson, signing a partnership. So some of those conversations and dialogue between the civilian and military sides were actually formalized. Those conversations even became more robust, and the Institute of Medicine, part of the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, did a review of our deployed trauma system compared to our civilian trauma system. They came away with the challenges very similar. And also they came up with the notion of one nation, one trauma system. Okay? Very bold. Instead of identifying the differences, let's identify the commonalities and improve outcomes. And that was eventually then written into law, the budget, National Defense Authorization Act. That's how things get done in DOD, as you know, congressional leadership who manage the budget. And using our American College of Surgeons partners, they were able to effectively inform elected representatives that these would be things which would improve outcomes, not only on the civilian side, but also on the military side. And our senior leadership has also been informed by the Undersecretary of Defense that the military health system should focus generously on the deployed trauma system. The military health system has a huge mission, the readiness of soldiers, airmen, sailors, marines. Also the beneficiaries, the retirees. However, the Undersecretary of Defense said the main focus is deployed care. Now, it's been identified that These partnerships, the collaboration with military and civilian sides are important, particularly because our clinical experience in our military hospitals are not quite as robust as the civilian side. For example, I'm active duty. My duty station is Cooper University Hospital in Camden, New Jersey. No need for no shortage of patients who would benefit from trauma care in Camden, New Jersey. So the DOD is sending their surgeons to locations where our skills can be maintained. So in summary, these are the things which we've identified that, in my estimation, have improved outcomes. And cumulatively, they've led to improved case fatality rate. What's next? It's great to talk about the past. And what's next? Many wars have been preceded by a small war. We've been focused in Central Asia. There are other areas in which the Department of Defense are looking at in other parts of Asia currently. Concern for storm clouds, right? Now is the time for us to prepare. Now is the time to get ready for the next one. Right? We've seen a slide before. We've improved things in Operation Enduring Freedom. What's next? What is next? What's the case fatality rate going to be at the onset of the next one? Is it going to be higher? Is it going to be lower? And what is the slope of that line going to be? So these are the sort of things which I think about, which certainly your military custom leadership are very much focused on. And let me just describe how those things we discussed earlier, they can be improved. Okay? The processes. Further collaboration with our subject matter experts, the true thought leaders on trauma care in the civilian sector. Greater collaboration. It's happening. Data. One of the challenges we may have in a theater of operations, getting that data back from the point of injury into our registry, it's going to be a challenge. We know there's efforts to thwart communications. It has to be done securely. How can that be provided back to the state so the analysis can be undertaken so we can continue to improve those outcomes? This training standardization. We know there's greater subspecialization in surgery than ever before. How do we get everyone up to speed? What are the appropriate training platforms? Investigations. So we need to have those who are very knowledgeable about the statistical analysis to improve outcomes. And leadership. You know, we need to have support leadership as they continue to support us in the past, continue to support us in the future. I absolutely certainly will. But we also need to train the next generation of clinical leaders who are not only the clinical experts, but the educators. It's important to maintain that link with the next generation to understand the communication pattern. So it must be the educators. They have to understand how to answer some of those questions, conduct clinical investigations. And that unwavering focus on improving combat casualty care is a must. And indeed, a life of service is a constant test of one's will. Direct quote from John F. Kennedy at the address to the graduates of the Naval Academy in 1961. But however, that next generation of leaders is being developed. And then finally, the collaboration with between our military and civilian partnerships, I think is absolutely critical. Very good. Well, thank you very much for your attention today. I've enjoyed talking to you, see a lot of friends and relatives here, and I'm glad to answer any questions that you might have. Yes, sir.
Okay. This is Warren. Go ahead and introduce your name, your full name.
Okay, my name is Warren Kirby, and as far as trauma goes, like if there was a problem in an airport or something, most people don't know their blood type. You were talking about giving blood on the way to the hospital as a help. Can they test people's blood and tell what the type is on the way?
Now, certainly in the civilian experience, that has not been the practice. Us in the DOD, we recognize the value of blood early, and in fact, all U.S. service members for fully deployed, we know our blood type. And it's confirmed on the dog tags, but we actually test it. And one thing that's being used in a theater operation is the walking blood bank. You know, refrigerated whole blood is good. Warm, fresh, whole blood is even better. So what happens with our units that deploy downrange, knowing blood types, and perhaps a Special Forces ODA, Operation Detachment Alpha, 12 service members, the medic in that Operation Detachment Alpha knows the blood type of each of their members and knows who can give blood to who in case they're wounded. And we do have the capability in the theater of operations now, so we know what each service member's blood type is and who they can donate to. So that's a huge way to improve combat casualty care. We do have some advantages in the Department of Defense, which our civilian partners don't. Okay, and certainly using our DoD colleagues, you know, we all get, as many of you recall, you get a lot of shots when we get in the DoD. We'll also we get tested for disease quite frequently. So one of those things that's done is to test it before you deploy to ensure you would be a safe donor.
Any other questions, raise your hands. Okay, Mr. Coker, David Coker.
In April of 2010, I traveled to Haiti after the earthquake. And when I got down there were all these people talking about how the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, had moved in an entire fully operational trauma center to that island. And what they did in terms of treating the Haitian people who were injured in the earthquake is apparently legendary. The unit was not there when I was there. They had already taken it away 12 or 3 months later. But my question is, do you ever powwow with foreign medical officials to compare notes and try to find out how they do things and what works for them or what works for us that they can benefit from? Have we done very much of that?
Absolutely. And that's a great way to improve outcomes. Elon Glassberg was the commander of that unit in Haiti in 2010. Elon Glassberg is now the Surgeon General of Israel. So Elon Glassberg, we collaborate very closely, and we learn a lot. In fact, Elon, before one of the, which was 2012, but later in that operation, we collaborated closely on the way to supply to provide subject matter expertise on freeze-dried plasma for their troops in Israel. We actually learned a huge amount from our partners. Let me give you another example. I talked about some of the natural experiments which exist. The reserve unit trained up to EMT paramedic level. Active duty component trained up to the EMT basic. One thing that happened in Helmand province in Afghanistan, that's where Afghanistan was divided into 4 sections. North was generally NATO, Germans took the lead, medical support. The central and east U.S. took those 2 sections, and down south, the United Kingdom took that. And of course, the UK health system is a bit different than ours. And they were actually exposed to a medicine known as tranexamic acid for years. It's been used as a way to avoid the breakdown of clot. And they had actually incorporated that into some of their practices that hadn't really been incorporated into U.S. practices. Well, one study that was done was looking at our UK colleagues in Helmand Province who use tranexamic acid standardly in their resuscitation protocols in the U.S. who had not adopted it, and we compared. That's the better outcomes were in the group that received tranexamic acid. So we collaborate very, very closely with our international partners. It's a great opportunity for us to learn. And in fact, if we talk about NATO, many reasons for functional interoperability. Ammunition, for example, some of the rounds we use are actually called NATO rounds because they're compatible with our NATO partners. We also talk about the NATO litter. That is, our litters have to be the same length so they can fit on our aircraft as well as their aircraft. So, yeah, we collaborate closely. Be unlikely to think it's just a great opportunity for us to learn and for them to learn and share. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Dr. Mark Myers, Season Family Practitioner, Evansville, Indiana.
In the military, of course, you have a lot of young, healthy individuals, normal kidneys, normal livers, normal lungs, normal hearts. Unfortunately, there's that 9% you referenced that don't make it. Is there any kind of policy on part of this department for organ donation that integrate within this healthcare system?
Those individuals who are potential donors who've been injured in a field operations can serve as donors. Now, oftentimes the injuries that are experienced in the field of operations are complex. We think of blast injury, multiple areas are injured. There are those individuals, just as in the civilian realm, who have solely a head injury. And yes, those individuals who would be candidates are evacuated out of theater, and those deceased have been organ donors in the U.S. We've been able to get those individuals back. And just so you know that there are those casualties who are severely injured who may not have that opportunity for survivorship and who are critically ill. There's no resource which is not utilized for an individual service member. Launching a C-17 from San Antonio to pick up a severe burn patient, an entire aircraft be launched for one patient. We also, those individuals who are critically ill who may or not survive, if they're critically ill, as they are evacuated out of theater, most recent experience to Germany, families are flown from the States to Germany to meet their fallen service member, not knowing if they will have survived or not. But those individuals who do meet standard donor requirements can, if they had directed, contribute, yes.
Question for Dr. Gross. I've got actually one statement and a couple of questions, but the statement is I was in the Persian Gulf War and I was on the USS Guam, and we didn't know when we were going to war. We were floating around in January, and all of a sudden the refrigerator in that lab was full of blood. There were about 20 or probably 100 packs of blood, and we were sort of a mini hospital ship, and all of a sudden we did go to war real soon because blood lasts about 30 days in the refrigerator. So it did happen about 5 days after that. That's just a comment. Persian Gulf War, we had 2 hospital ships floating around in Comfort, and there's another one. You might state about how staging is. Our ship was going to take care of people that came off the land after the invasion. If we invaded with the amphibious group, then we're going to stage them in our ship, then they're going to move the hospital ship, similar to what you were saying. I'd like you to comment on hospital ships in war. The main thing is we have at least 2 trauma hospitals here. We have Dr. Blum, so certainly the trauma hospital was, and but it's very hard to get a designation as a trauma hospital. but both St. Vincent's and Deaconess have a trauma hospital. That means they need all kinds of qualifications to take care of you quickly. And are their rules all the same as yours? Like get those people like that gentleman Gates said, get them there within an hour? Is that why these helicopters go around? And what happens in big cities, guys like you need to train in big cities because all that trauma happens in the big cities. There's about 30 questions in one.
Well, I'm very familiar with the hospital ships. In fact, at the start of the Iraq invasion, we anticipated larger numbers of casualties that actually existed. And so I believe it was the Comfort was in the Gulf, and the Mercy is over in San Diego. Is that correct? Yeah. So the Comfort was in the Gulf, ready to receive patients, and we did evacuate some patients from Iraq. Some of the slides I showed today were from Nasiriyah, Iraq, southern Iraq, and so patients would be flown from Iraq down to Kuwait and then off onto the Comfort. Yeah, the Comfort's a 1,000-bed facility and well-resourced, has much more sophisticated imaging capability than our small theater hospitals. Just tremendous resources. And some of the other questions then?
There's trauma hospitals in Evansville and trauma hospitals across the country. Is it the Army that pushed them up to that level, or they pushed themselves to that level? Because there's so many qualifications. A surgeon has to live in a hospital just to be ready within that 1 hour. What's it give to go out quickly? But can you talk about hospitals in Evansville and how the Army's either made some analogies to them or helped them, or have you learned your lessons from them?
Yeah, I think there's been a going back and forth. Now, truly, the folks who've been championing the trauma systems, who are the American College of Surgeons on Trauma, who actually set the standards through the Outcome Resources book for those reviews. And in fact, I know that they may be viewed as onerous. However, there are reasons for those requirements, and I certainly getting into the issue of trauma systems on trauma hospitals on the civilian side, and there are very specific requirements, I think, to get to the optimal outcomes. And this is where, certainly there are challenges with the various organizations. Many locations wish to have a hospital. It's a trauma center. It's a huge commitment. But there have been very good outcomes with that regionalization of trauma care. But yeah, that's I think it's like politics, it's all local. But the American College of Surgeons on Trauma, they can step back, not knowing the local politics, say these are the standards, and there are good reasons. They may not all be founded in science, but these are efforts to even improve the functioning systems that exist. There has been an effort for some of the military hospitals to be incorporated into the civilian trauma system. We do have one level 1 trauma center in the military, that's Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, but the DOD's been late to the party on the trauma systems. As the civilian trauma systems became mature in the late 80s and early 1990s, the military hospitals did not participate. And so the civilian trauma system now is very mature. And so you can imagine the effort for some military hospitals to become identified as verified hospitals that may not necessarily increase the throughput. So I think that there's a lot of debate in the DOD, but one way to mitigate that for the skills is to ensure that we have our individuals with our civilian hospitals. Another huge takeaway from having our military members who may be junior at our civilian hospitals is that they're not only there to maintain their clinical skills, the leadership at our level 1 trauma centers are truly some thought leaders. So the idea is there's some mentorship, so that as they mature and then have to take on setting up a deployed trauma system, they will have worked with those senior leaders as well. I've been a beneficiary of working with Dr. Morris at Vanderbilt, and Mahias in Miami, and Dr. Porter in Camden. And those lessons, as we establish future trauma systems, are just as important.
How about other questions for anybody? I want, yes, sir. I'll give the microphone to you. While I'm getting the microphone to you, I'm going to pass by a lady. She outranks this guy. She is General Fairchild. Stand up, Miss Fairchild. This is General Fairchild. You don't see many women that are generals. Right here, she came all the way from Florida. Here, Dr. She's a major general. That's about 3 ranks above this man. That's way up there, okay? She can tell him what to do.
Hello, my name is Ed Kramer. I have a question. You looked at standardization, and I looked at that and a lot we're trying to create. How do we balance innovation and creativity with standardization of care? Because they're both kind of critical. But if you lock everybody down, we can't try something new. Sure. How do we get something new to find that improvement? And nothing always new, out of control, is a good idea. So I understand how do we balance that?
That's a great question. I think this is where we need to ensure that those individuals who may need some assuring follow the standard, but then also recognize that innovation must occur. And this is where the senior folks maintain close ties with civilian partners. What are the thought leaders? What's the new research on coagulopathy? So those new developments can be written into our protocols. But certainly it's not, we need to ensure we don't stifle. But unfortunately, oftentimes the way we will improve is by avoiding variation. And if we don't have some standards, we know that variation will occur. Institute of Medicine in 1999, in a classic article entitled "To Err is Human," identified that in America, 100,000 lives are lost annually due to variation in care. And so the bottom line of that study from the Institute of Medicine in 1999 was to minimize variation. So have specific guidelines. But certainly that doesn't take away with the obligation of those leaders who understand the issues to make sure they are continually looking for new things. I would suggest that in any sort of discipline we mature, and certainly not that a intern can come up with a great idea. Certainly that can be discussed and brought to leadership to perhaps incorporate, but that's where the level of saying, hey, this is how we should change our practice should happen. That it's really incumbent upon the clinical leaders to stay in touch with the next generation, with new ideas. But I think that generally in the clinical community, there's not that shortage of efforts we seek to continue innovation. That's the yin and yang that we're basically instilling in discipline.
Other questions in the audience? Okay, Dr. Colonel Groves, can't thank you enough driving all the way, flying all the way here from New Jersey. We already have that. No way I'm going to look that good. Even if I go on a diet for 10 years, I'm going to look that good. Okay, first Thursday of August, we got a talker here, and we just talked about him, and we got one after that in Canada during World War II, a Canadian named Rodekovich. But thanks for coming. And Dr. Mark Myers was in the Air Force. He made a mistake by not getting in the Navy. But you can excuse him for that. Thank you for coming.
Congratulations. Call the ball. Call the ball.